Thanks for listening to this podcast of Trending with Timmery. If you haven't already subscribed, please catch us wherever you love to listen to your podcast, from the Relevant Radio app to Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to go and give us a 5-star review to help other people discover the podcast. Anything you share in terms of episodes, whether it's texting it to a friend, posting on social media, helps to build up the kingdom for God, to help confront the challenging issues we face as a culture, but with joy, with hope, and with an eternal perspective where our faith collides with everyday life, bringing eternal principles to help us live our life joyfully.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
Today, a historic day. Ketanji Brown Jackson is now Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. She was confirmed by the Senate to the Supreme Court of the United States. We've talked a lot over the last couple of weeks about Justice Jackson and her qualifications, which, as we know, qualifications, education, background, she is qualified. But the qualification when it comes to her prudence as a judge, and that in and of itself is what has been in question. Her choice to ignore precedents when it comes to the type of sentencing that has been recommended from probation officers or various types of crimes that a person might commit. She goes off on her own, and she essentially is an activist from the bench. She chooses what she wants to do. And this is concerning, especially as we are divided as a nation when it comes to how the Constitution should be interpreted. And although she has refused to say what her approach to the Constitution is, what her judicial philosophy is, we do know that she's dug her heels in, claiming she's pro-abortion in various stances. And we do know that she's been replaced by a president who holds to very dramatic and radical ideologies when it comes to the human person and family, even though he claims to be Catholic and live out what the Catholic Church teaches. So it's a moment for us, as we see Justice Jackson is now in the Supreme Court, for us to continue to know the reality of the human person, the truth and the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of God within the family. And even if and when various cases are decided by our Supreme Court that may or may not fall in line with a Christian moral view, the proper view of the creation of the human person, that we still continue to live that out. The good news is that we do have a majority on the court that is leaning toward a pro-life position and an originalist type of perspective when it comes to the Constitution, honoring the perspective of God, creation, and basic human rights. You're listening to Trending with Timmery here on Relevant Radio. It's our weekly marriage hour. We're going to dive into a Catholic view of marriage over an abundance of pessimistic marriage advice that I have found has just flowed ever since the moment I announced my engagement till today. Of course, advice is always often unsolicited. All of us can be guilty of this. But how do we have a Catholic perspective, a Catholic lens when it comes to our marriage in the face of a very negative marriage advice culture? Well, we'll talk about that. And it's very helpful for moving and working through the day-to-day in our marriages, no matter where we are. We're also going to talk about divorce-proofing your marriage from the damage of screens, resolving conflict in your marriage over kids' screen usage, and really trying to end that conflict that's occurring with kids surrounding what type of usage they have in their screens. We're also going to look at the shocking information that's come out over the last couple of weeks about these 5 aborted babies that were found in Washington, D.C. You're listening to Trending with Timmery here on Relevant Radio. Joining me now is the founder of ScreenStrong.com. She works to help parents take back their kids from screen addiction in the digital age and helps to reduce screen conflict within the home, especially among children. We're going to dive into the topic of divorce proofing your marriage and really looking to how screens are playing a key role in the crisis today surrounding long term marriage relationships. So many people have talked about this, from struggles within their own marriage, from feeling unheard, ignored, alone, or maybe one spouse is acting secretive, to the need for understanding maybe even the need for help over outright addictions, or how phones are used as a nervous habit to avoid conflict. But here's what's fascinating. If we look at some of the statistics today, whether it's the United States or other nations, we're seeing that screen time, screen usage is playing a key role in divorce. In fact, recent piece of information just came out from China that even China is claiming that screen usage is one of the top causes for divorce. 30% of divorces, according to South China Morning Post, are due to screen usage. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen divorce lawyers say that porn usage accounts for a significant cause of divorce. We've seen over 56% of divorces cases can involve one party having some addictive quality when it comes to the use of pornography. Social media has been a leading cause of divorce, along with video game usage. In fact, Divorce Online reports that 15% of divorces are a result of video games. And so, to dive into this topic with everything from binge watching a show to social media is Melanie Hempy from ScreenStrong.com. Melanie, from your work with addressing screen addiction, what do you advise, and what do you make of these trends surrounding the crisis couples are facing surrounding their marriage and screen usage?
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for having me back to talk about this. This is such a big problem in our country, and really, I think the biggest problem with marriages and when screen time is being overused, it's just a lack of actual spending time with your spouse. It all goes back to that. Really, when you sum up, Timmery, when you sum up the screen problem, whether it's for adults or for kids, we're talking about just a few things. It's time, it's content, and it's the lack of getting other things done. We call that life skills. And so about everything can fall, under one of those categories. So when you're talking about time, we know that if we don't spend time in person with the spouse that we're living with, our relationship is going to start to erode over time. The relationships have to be nurtured. And you nailed it just a second ago talking about video games. It's not that all these games are bad. Some of them are very bad, but what they all do is take time. And social media takes a lot of time. So if dad comes home and he jumps on his game and mom jumps on her phone, 2 hours goes by, right? And they don't even know, they feel like it's been 10 minutes. That's the persuasive design. So I think time is probably the least offensive as far as, content and whatever, but it's probably the most dangerous, because when we are spending too much time really doing anything else, it can be a problem with the relationship and with your marriage. And it happens a lot to young marriages. This is probably the most devastating thing that I hear story after story from young girls who are newly married in their first year or so, or maybe they just had their first child, right? They're still in that early stage of their marriage, and they come to a workshop or they call me and they are in tears. They are so lonely. They're taking care of this baby by themselves. Their husband comes home, and I'm not trying to throw the husbands under the bus here. This is just the reality. Video games are so addictive. They may not be addicted, but they are very addictive technologies. So they come home and they feel like their husband, is just jumping on his game. The baby's crying. Maybe the mom has been at work all day. She comes home and she has to make the dinner and she has to do. It's very unbalanced. But he feels like he's tired and he wants to come home from work. And so he feels like he deserves like a break. And what I always recommend and suggest is that any screen time that married, especially young married couples do, it's screen time they can do together. So they can watch a movie. Maybe they have a favorite show they like to watch and they can unwind. But when you get into the trap of using that screen as your downtime, you are headed for trouble.
That's
The next thing
Melanie
is
Hempy from
yeah.
ScreenStrong.com here on Relevant Radio. Melanie, what's your next tip for couples battling the crisis in marriages surrounding technology use and the fact that we just feel like we're not spending time together today?
Yeah, we're not spending time. One of our tips is that you have to schedule your downtime now. We didn't used to have to do this. We used to do
Wow.
our chores, right? Do your dinner, get the laundry. But now, and then you had time, right? But now all that time is being sucked up. All the little extra nooks and crannies is what I call it, of the minutes of the day are getting sucked up with, screens. And so what we have to do, seriously, is block it out on our calendar and plan downtime and schedule it. And we do this with our kids too. But for a married couple, you have to be very diligent about doing this. And this downtime means there is no screen time, where it's time just the two of you, whether you just get some tea and go sit out on the back porch and talk. You have to schedule it now. That sounds crazy, right? But you have to. The other thing that I feel very, very passionate about is the idea that adults are always very clear about putting parental controls on their kids' devices, but not on their own devices. So this can really hurt a marriage if you don't do this. I believe that really the best parental control is a free parental control that comes, for example, Microsoft has a free thing when you get a computer, and it literally can block all the sites out, and not just the pornography sites, but what we do with our kids instead of just trying to block porn, we just block everything, and we only allow the certain things, the certain sites that we want them. This is a little bit different approach, and I don't know if we talked about this before, but this is really important for adults on their handheld devices, especially. On your computer, of course, that's for work. You have to work and you have to get to places. But on your handheld device, you do not need access to the full internet. It is too tempting. And we know from science that the best way to stay away from temptation and to build your willpower and to build your discipline is to seriously move away from the temptation. And what that means is you just don't allow that access on your small handheld screens. It's much easier to get in trouble on a handheld than it is on the TV in the den, for example, or your laptop.
Right, in communal spaces, right? Yeah, it's a difference we're seeing today. All privatized devices. This is why we binge watch more than we did before. We're always just turning in on ourselves, so we're justifying how much we use it, even if others are in the room, but we also justify the type of use we have with it.
Well, the multi-use, so you might be having your work laptop open, finishing something, but you also have your phone open, and then you're sitting with TV going. So there's really no chance for you to have any quality time with your spouse. That's never going to happen. You have to remember that the human brain is starving for a relationship and to be in the presence of another person. That it's not the same online. It doesn't even meet any of that need when you're just trying to move those relationships online. So you're married, you obviously love this person, but you're not investing and you're not feeding that relationship. And I'm not talking about just a random date night once a week. I'm talking about every 24-hour period. There has to be time set aside to be with your spouse. Sometime for my husband and I, sometime what I have to do is jump in the car with him when he's driving to a game or driving somewhere, and I'm like, oh, wow, we get 30 minutes in the car together, just us, and we can talk, but I'm very aware of that now. It's very, very difficult in our screen age to get those pockets of time. So for the moms out there and for the wives out there, I'll just tell you, this is kind of your job, because in most homes, the mom is the one with the calendar, and she's kind of figuring out where everybody has to be, And for the dad, though, being the leader of your family, this is something that has to be taken as a priority. And you have to also, I think that one of the best things you can do is actually take a little inventory. Take a week and write down, how much time you spent on your screen when you get home from work. Just start writing it down. It's very eye-opening. It's very, very eye-opening to see how much we're really spending because we don't think we are. We really don't, but it's
Right.
very, very hurtful, right?
Absolutely. Melanie, you have so many incredible resources for couples, for parents at screenstrong.com. I highly recommend it. We'll post a link in social media on my Twitter at Timmerie, Timmerie now, as well as in the podcast notes for today's show. You can go back and listen or share this with a friend. But Melanie, it's making me think about how when my husband and I first got married, there were a lot of ground rules that I sat down and said, hey, here's my approach when it comes to TV and social media in the home. And we had some very clear ground rules going in. And there were a few that my husband kind of resisted me on when discussing, some he really liked the idea of, others didn't quite seem to make sense. But with time, seeing some of the social science and brain science now, he's 100% on board. And a lot of it were things so simple as no cell phones in the bedroom or in the bed. And if the cell phone is in the bedroom, it's on airplane mode. It's across the room, used as an alarm, not used inside the room. No TVs in the bedroom. And we talked about, really a lot of ground rules that I think are so important, Melanie, that are so simple that you kind of start to create those sacred spaces in your home where you don't have that temptation of distraction that will pull you away from your spouse and your responsibilities. And I think that that's so important that we're engaging in that. As you discussed, human brain is starving for relationships. And unless we self-regulate, unless we develop what we're called to as Christians, and that is virtue, especially the virtues of self-control, moderation, temperance, and prudence. To have the prudence to know the right time and the wrong time to use the incredible tool of technology, but to also know when to shut it down. Melanie, where can people get more resources from you to regulate screens within their home?
Our website is screenstrong.com. We have a couple things on there. We have a new parent course that is just coming out, and that will take you through all the science, and it will take you all the solutions to the steps that we recommend for a Screen Strong lifestyle. And again, the Screen Strong lifestyle is not anti-screen. We are very into technology over here, but what we help parents and married couples, but parents especially, with how to limit the toxic screens. So it's the video games, it's social media, and pornography. Those are the three things. And we are very clear with our values on that. And our core values can be found on our website as well. But we believe that you need to delay addictive screens with your kids. You need to eliminate those toxic screens. Not all screens. They say, well, you can't take all the candy away. Well, you can take the poison candy away. So we want to talk about eliminating that. Developing life skills is really important with a Screen Strong lifestyle, and then prioritizing authentic relationships. And this is the part we're talking about more today, about prioritizing those relationships and then building healthy families with spending more time together with your kids. And when you were just talking about what we were just talking about as far as tips, there's another tip that I have.
That's Melanie Hempy from screenstrong.com. We'll come back with that last tip for married couples on how to divorce-proof your marriage from the addictive quality of technology, screens, video games, social media, all of it. We're also going to discuss the marriage struggle that many people are experiencing over how to regulate screens with kids. We'll be right back during our weekly marriage hour.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Are you single and looking and praying for a spouse? Well, I'd love to pray with you. If you call in, I will pray with you now. And if you don't make it on, we will pray with you for you by name. Numbers 1-888-914-9149. Single crisis that so many young men and women are facing today is near and dear to my heart, and I will add you to my prayer list. Again, you can give us a call, 1-888-914-9149. I'd love to pray with you now. Or you can also share your name with me on Instagram, on my Instagram story at Timmerie, Timmerie. I'm aggregating names there. It's our weekly marriage hour today on Trending. We talk everything from dating, relationships, to long-term marriage and marriage tips from a Catholic perspective. We're going to talk about marriage struggles over screen decisions for kids and that ongoing battle and conflict, both in the home with children, but sometimes with your spouse if your spouse isn't on the same page. We're also going to discuss having a Catholic lens of marriage in a culture where there's an abundance of pessimistic marriage advice that can get in the way. We'll dive into also the shocking news of the 5 aborted babies that were found in DC last week. We've been talking about them and the significance of these 5 babies and why this story continues to be a news story. We'll touch on that in just a moment. But if you have a question, especially for our guest now, Melanie Hempy from ScreenStrong.com, helping you to take back your kid from the digital world and reduce that conflict surrounding screens in the home. The number's 1-888 914-9149. Melanie, we're seeing a struggle between spouses now over the use of technology within the home, not just with regard to feeling abandoned or ignored by your spouse, but how to approach screen use with kids, whether it's social media or video games. It's becoming a real problem for parents and what their parental philosophy will be individually and as a team. How are parents able to reconcile these differences with the many incredible resources that you have for parents today?
It is a big problem, Timmery. It's just probably one of the top 3 of the questions I get every week about screen struggles. And what the question is, what do I do? My spouse is not on board. I know that my son or my daughter is having all the signs of a addiction, of a screen addiction, whether it's video games or social media, but my spouse is not on board. And so with a divided house, it's very, very, very difficult to make any changes in your home. And the very first thing that I tell folks right away is that they have to get educated. You have to try to put your emotion aside because it's a very emotional issue, and you have to literally start reading books and get educated. On our book, on our website, we have a lot of book recommendations there, but our new course was designed for the first part of that course to be all education on just basic brain development, the brain science around kids' brains and screens, and then the science around video games, the science around social media. We try to put it all under one roof so there's somewhere for parents to go. This is such a touchy subject because usually one spouse is, really into their screen a little more maybe than the other one, or maybe they both are, but one has read a little bit more about what's happening with the kids, and one might be staying at home and they're actually seeing the results every day, and the other spouse doesn't see it the same way, but they see that their child is having meltdowns, or they are having problems when you have to, unplug them, or they're sneaking around. It's interfering with their relationship with their child. Kids start to get very disrespectful, and they can usually be really disrespectful to one spouse. And then the Disney spouse comes home at night and they're going to be nice to them. And, your kids will kind of play you on this. They know that if they can get mom and dad divided, then they're going to get their way. And it does cause a lot of conflict and a lot of marriage problems. So the first thing, of course, is to get educated. The second thing is that you've got to come together and agree to disagree on maybe some of the philosophies around what you think screens are doing, and take a look at your own child. And when I'm going to say to put your kid first, I don't mean that your kid is first in the house. I mean, if they are having a budding screen addiction or dependency problem, you have to put that over your own desire to play video games, for example. It's very difficult for kids to balance use in their home when mom and dad really are not modeling it. Now, I don't believe that kids and parents have the same screen rules whatsoever. I'm not saying that, because I believe parents are the leaders in the home, and we really hurt our kids when we treat them like equals. That's a very, very bad thing from a psychological point for a child. But what I am saying is that you have to put your screens down long enough in order to be intentional with your child, to spend time with them, to do this together, mom and dad together, to have certain nights of the week where there maybe are just no screen activities, or maybe you watch a family movie or a family 30-minute show. I know one tip here is for parents to literally keep their phones in the car, literally shut the car door
Mm-hmm.
with your phone in the car. You
That's a
walk in
great
the
tip.
house. Yeah, because if it's in there on the kitchen counter, even if it's not in the place where you're eating, you're still going to hear it. You're going to be distracted.
Right.
But if it's out of sight, out of mind, the other big tip is we recommend a talk text phone, and even for your kids, even for your house phone. So a lot of parents are now actually getting another cell phone. It's just a talk text phone, and that is just for the emergency phone in the house, because everybody's going to say, oh, I can't not have my phone. What if something happens to my other child, or my mom has to call me, or whatever? So you can, we need to bring back the home phone, and it's not going to be a plug-in like the old-timey ones. It's funny to call those old-timey now. But you can have a designated cell phone. The company that we recommend is on our site. It's Gab, and we love them because it's just talk and text, and it doesn't have the internet. And so there's not a whole lot of distractions that you're going to get from that. The next thing is just not to make this a personal attack on your spouse. I mean, I have this, funny thing I say sometimes, do you want to be right or do you want to stay married? So there's certain things that you just have to put aside, even if you disagree that screens are hurting your kids. You just have to come together with your spouse and reach some sort of compromise. I hate to use that word compromise when I talk about screens, because I don't think that any child deserves to get the short end of the stick when we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
compromising a toxic screen like pornography, for example. It's never good to just balance the toxic uses of screens. And social media is right up there with one of the most toxic uses of a screen for an adolescent child or a younger child that there could be. You may think as an adult it's fine, and this is where the rub comes, and this is where the conflict comes, because parents can, they don't understand. They think that all the stuff is fine for them, and what they don't understand is it's not fine for their kid. And so that's where the conflicts come in. And then you have a lot of conflicts, Timmy, with the child, and you're constantly
Right.
arguing,
Yeah.
and in that case, usually what happens, one spouse sort of has to take the side of the child, and so now you've got this divided fight going on where, you've got the child with one spouse on one side and then the other spouse on the other side. And this creates so much conflict in the home. And children, by having these video games and social media, by having this, they are given way too much power to
Right.
control the climate.
The parent.
And
Right.
yes, they're
The
controlling.
parent.
It's just
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
They might as well just have a little remote control, right, hooked to it, because
Yes.
you just envision that
Well,
in your head.
right. It's interesting because I think that, when I see most parents want resolution for their kids. So if the kid's, screaming on an airplane, if handing the kid a tablet to get the kid to be quiet works, that's great on an airplane. But I think that that approach has been taken to getting your kid to eat her breakfast. So we're just putting a screen in front of her to get her to stay still for half an hour to do that. Or, always just wanting some downtime. And so putting a screen in front of your kid. Parents want silence, so that the kids aren't screaming. They want their kids to be smart. They want their kids to be happy. But when the research that you're referring to, that you have aggregated at screenstrong.com, when that research, I think, is presented to another spouse, it's a game changer if you can actually get that information to them, especially younger parents today. Younger parents are all about, give me a scientific proof, show me a psychological study. And so that information, your first point of education, I think is really the game changer when it comes to disagreement with your spouse about how to give kids technology. What would you say, Melanie, if you're just joining us, that's Melanie Hempy from screenstrong.com. Melanie, what would you say is kind of maybe that number one piece of information that a parent could use to help their spouse understand the impact that these screens are having on their kids?
I think the most important piece is the development of the adolescent brain. The limbic area in the brain is on overdrive. That's the emotion center, and they're very excited about risk-taking and novelty, and that develops before the frontal cortex, and the frontal cortex is a judgment center. And I think that's one of the biggest, most important things for people to understand, that their child is not able to. It's not because they're just not mature, or they're not choosing to be, able to. They cannot, from a biological standpoint, their brain is not fully connected. It's like asking a child to fly a jet airplane when they barely can ride their bike. It's just way too much. And I think that's the one piece of information that when parents really understand that piece, and, you know, in my course, I go through this really clearly, but when they understand that, it just gives them a big sigh of relief. And it's like, wow, I didn't even know that it really does take 25 years to develop a brain. And what that means is our kids are really intelligent, but they're not mature. And that one scientific fact is so helpful. And there's many more scientific facts that we don't have time to go into tonight. But just that one to know, everybody needs to take a big, deep breath and let our kids have a childhood, and let your teenagers have an adolescence that is not full of stress and anxiety and depression and pornography content and, rejection and all the things that they find in social media and even on video games. They need a break. I think deep down, kids are just absolutely dying for their parents to come together and be on the same team and say, we love you so much. We're not going to do this anymore in our house. We're going to spend time with you. We're going to trade all that crazy screen time, and we're actually going to do family things together. When that happens, that conflict just melts away. You know, my oldest son was very, very addicted to video games. We had so many arguments in our home all through those years. I kept thinking he was going to outgrow it. He went to college and he dropped out because all he did was keep playing video games. And now with my younger sons, we have such a different life. We never argue over screen time, for one. Can you imagine? For everybody listening, can you imagine never having an argument about screen time? We have so much fun. It's like we hit that speed bump, Timmery, and we got over it. And now we are on this other side, and we have so much fun with our kids. And that's what they want. And we are the parents, and we are the coaches, and the kids are not in charge, but they feel very, very secure with that arrangement. And they know we have their back. And you know, we're going to help them. But most importantly, during these really, really short years, you do not want your kids to look back and remember that all you did was argue. Because I bet right now, if you have tweens or teens in your house, you're having a lot of arguments about limits and content and, you know, just how much time and what time and homework that's not getting done and life skills that aren't being done.
Let's
and
reduce
chores
that
aren't being done.
Yes, that's Melanie Hempy from ScreenStrong.com. We're talking about resolving conflict between spouses over how to regulate screens and how to resolve that conflict with your kids. Those have been the tips. You can find resources at ScreenStrong.com. We're also including a link of a number of resources mentioned by Melanie Hempy here on Trending. We'll be right back during our weekly marriage hour.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Selena Gomez, the childhood Disney Channel star and singer, stopped by Good Morning America, and she shared that she is the happiest she has ever been. And she explained how this had to do with ditching social media 4.5 years ago. In fact, she says she actually feels normal now. She said that she's not even browsed the internet in 4.5 years. It's been a game changer for her and her happiness. So as we've been talking about screen addiction, screen usage, and how to resolve conflicts within marriage, about how to regulate screens for your kids, but also how to regulate screens in your marriage with your spouse and together so you have quality time. I think that Selena Gomez, who's now 29 years old, is a great testament. Someone who grew up with this technology, has been in the limelight for all this time, has said the great impact and the happiness that being off of screens, off of social media has had on her. We'll actually talk about this a little bit more in detail yesterday, but if you didn't catch the rest of the show about resources on how to help regulate screens in your marriage and with your kids, please go back, listen to this podcast, relevantradio.com/trending, or wherever you catch your podcast. We are there as a resource, and this is an episode that is a resource for someone you may know and love who needs it to help regulate and moderate those screens. That's what we're called to as Christians, as Christian spouses, and as Christian parents, to implement virtue in our home. And screens are a great way to start teaching that virtue. If you're single, I would love to pray for you for a spouse. The number's 1-888-914-9149. If you're searching for a spouse, I would love to pray with you. You can also share your name on Instagram. I put it up on my Instagram story. I'm aggregating names to pray for. You're near and dear to my heart. So the number is 1-888-914-9149. Okay, so it's our weekly marriage hour and something I've been thinking a lot about recently. And I've seen it ever since I became engaged. Remember, I shared the exciting news. Here I am. My husband and I waited way too long to get married. Finally engaged. We're so excited. And a lot of the people I shared the news with had very pessimistic, negative, discouraging, and hopeless things to say about marriage. And I wasn't surprised in the respect that we live in a culture where many people have struggled with marriage, whether it be in their upbringing or in their marriages themselves, having faced broken marriages. We live in a culture that has taken God out of the story of marriage. And so marriage is about whatever we want it to be. There's no such thing as fidelity, commitment. We can kick kids out of the context of marriage. And so, although on one end it wasn't surprising, on the other end it was surprising. I just announced I was engaged, and there was all of this negative response. It was a good luck, good for you type of moment. And I mention this because it's fascinating because whenever you mention marriage or maybe a potential difficulty in your marriage, the advice flows. And unfortunately, a lot of the advice tends to be rather negative. And it's funny because I mentioned marriage and when there's a moment, I think just last week here during our weekly marriage hour, how there's a moment in your marriage where you start to realize where marriage just starts to become real work. It wasn't the same as it was before. You need to be more intentional. Things start to get busy with kids. And marriages work from the beginning. Our attitude should always be intentional. But there are moments I've heard and I've seen in my own marriage in the brief few years we've been married where you have to lean in a little bit more. You need to be more intentional. I remember when I first got married, I was working almost every night of the week. And so if we wanted to have time together, I had to wake up earlier and we had to treasure our time together and enjoy making breakfast and have those be the meals of the day that we had together rather than just showing up exhausted and crashing at the end of our day. And so it's funny because as I was talked about that, I was fascinated by some of the responses I had that were so negative. Well, like, oh, if marriage is already difficult for you, good luck. And I wasn't saying that just marriage is difficult. I was talking about those moments where marriage becomes more work and it's an opportunity to dig in. It's actually a good thing because with a Christian perspective on marriage, we should see those as opportunities, not as negative moments. An opportunity, just like anything in life, where we change our perspective, we shift what we're doing. And so, in a culture that has abundant negative advice when it comes to marriage, this is a reminder that we have to have a Catholic view of marriage. And the answer to that isn't a, hey, good luck, honey, I hope it turns out well for you. It's a moment where we recognize that the answer to all of human existence is the cross. Jesus Christ came for the salvation of souls. And he came and he showed us what it means to be human, the perfection of humanity, and where we are created to go. That is heaven. And he did this on the cross. The sign of the cross, as Catholics, we make that sign over and over again in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. It's not just a salutation to God. It's not like saying, hey, knock, knock, can you open the door? It's not like picking up a phone. No, that sign of the cross is we're invoking the name of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We're reminded of our baptism. We're reminded that we are children of God, but we're also marking ourselves physically with that cross that is meant to be the definition, the orientation of who we are in order to be united to God, that we are made perfect in suffering, in sacrifice. Christ modeled to us life-giving, self-giving love, and we are meant to imitate Jesus Christ with life-giving, self-giving love. But if we have a perspective that is lacking faith, then much of what we do in life is just simply wishful thinking and perhaps even luck or chance. And I think this is why a lot of people have such negative views when it comes to giving marriage advice. Wishful thinking. Yeah, it's a great idea. You think you're going to get married? You think it's going to last? Good luck if you find that you've had even a slight bit of a roadblock and you think that's hard. As one person comment, well, try 30 something years of marriage, then you'll see some roadblocks. It's so easy for us to be negative or to have a perspective that uh, is pessimistic about marriage, but that goes against our faith. With faith, we have that perspective of sacrificial love of Christ. We have that model of the bridegroom, that is Jesus Christ, who laid down his life for his bride. We see the ultimate model of Christian spouses explained to us by St. Paul in the New Testament book, Ephesians chapter 5. Have you ever read that chapter? It talks about those scandalous words to many people's ears that spouses are meant to be mutually submissive to one another, that wives are meant to be submissive to their husbands, and that husbands are to lay down their lives for their bride as Christ did for the church. If you're trying to figure out who you want to marry, well, do so by laying down your life for your bride. You're trying to figure out who you want to marry. Are you willing to die for someone? Or if you're trying to figure out, if you're a woman trying to figure out who to marry, who is willing to make that sacrifice for you of selflessness? That's what we're called to in marriage, a self-offering. That's the context of our marriages. So if we find we're not spending enough time together, if one of us is spending too much time on social media, whatever it might be, use that lens to guide how to make that adjustment. Now, it's interesting if we talk about what our marital lens should be, how we approach marriage. God built into the human body incredible capacities to succeed and thrive in marriage. Even just the physical dimension of intimacy, and how intimacy on a physical dimension boosts your marriage just with these bonding hormones and chemicals and endorphins that are released. It's a brain cocktail. When you engage in physical intimacy with your spouse, you have dopamine, that pleasure high. You have oxytocin, that bonding chemical. You have norepinephrine that tells the body, hold on, this is something important. Your spouse is someone important. Serotonin that gives you a sense of serenity. All of these are meant to bond you to your spouse. And it creates this almost pair of glasses in your mindset and your attitude toward your spouse, that you have a better outlook toward them. This is a brain cocktail that's occurring through physical intimacy. But what about a faith-filled perspective, a spiritual perspective and intention when it comes to marriage? Because after all, we're body and soul, but following the philosophical ideology and understanding, although we're body and soul, we are mostly soul. And we recognize this in the fact that although we look forward to the resurrection of our bodies in heaven one day, we can die and live without our body in heaven. But your body can't live without your soul. It decays, it breaks down, it's gone. And so this perspective should ultimately orient us to understanding what is our Catholic outlook on marriage. I was reading the book by Cardinal Robert Sarah that came out over the last year titled Couples Awaken Your Love. Highly recommend anything written by Cardinal Sarah. One of my favorite books is by him. It's on the power of silence against the dictatorship of noise. But this book, Couples Awaken Your Love, he contextualizes marriage within the context of the Eucharist. And he talks about how the love of Christian spouses springs from the heart of Christ. He says it has its source in the redemptive act of Christ on Good Friday. That is, marriage as Christian spouses who have entered into the covenant before God. And if you maybe didn't get married in the church, now is a great time to have your marriage blessed, to receive the blessing and the sanctification of that marriage, to give you the graces that marriage so desperately needs. As Cardinal Sarah is pointing to, that the love of Christian spouses springs from the heart of Christ, the redemptive act of Christ on Good Friday. That is, he became an absolute gift. He gave himself to you and for you, and his grace is poured out into your marriage. Come and follow me, he tells us. He says his burden is light. The yoke is easy because he does it with us. We are not alone. We are imitating him, but we are also being fueled by him. And so Cardinal Robert Sarah talks about how the Eucharist should be at the heart of our marriages, that it should be the source of married life, that our whole week should, as a family, as married spouses, should orient from having received the Eucharist on Sunday, or maybe if more often than that, and orient back toward receiving Christ again in the Eucharist the following Sunday. That our whole life is oriented around the Eucharist. That is total life-giving, self-giving love, union with God. Oh, you might say, okay, that sounds nice and fancy. How is that done practically? Well, it's done by what I love to say over and over here on Trending is liturgical living. Living liturgically, that not only are we going to Mass on Sundays, but we're making Sundays the Lord's Day again. That it's a day of rest. It's a day of feasting and delighting in God. It's a day of rest for our bodies, recognizing our dependence on Him, our love for Him. But that when we live liturgically, yes, we celebrate and we perhaps eat special things on Sundays, but then we celebrate some of those saints' feast days throughout the year. Maybe you pinpoint one or two a month and you go to Mass a couple extra times each month as a couple or as a family. There's so many Mass opportunities in the morning and evening. Maybe you can even plan to go once a week. I know since my husband and I were dating and ever since we've been married, we've always made the intention, even, if one of us was going to daily Mass, that there was always one day somewhere in the middle of the week where we met up for daily Mass. Because the Eucharist is at the heart of marriage. It must be at the heart of marriage. Cardinal Robert Sarah also says in his book, Couples Awaken Your Love, he talks about how God alone can quench each spouse's thirst for love, truth, and eternal happiness. I think that line is so important because we're all looking for love. We're all looking for truth, transparency, communion, ultimately trying to find happiness. And we make the mistake within our marriages sometimes where we look at the other person and expect them to make us happy. But what Cardinal Sarah is saying is that only God alone can quench each individual spouse's thirst for love, truth, and eternal happiness. That's part of the Catholic view of marriage. Your spouse will never make you happy. Your spouse will never make you feel complete and fulfilled. And there may be great moments of consolation and feeling great, but the reality is that Christ alone will satiate that absolute desire for perfect union and perfect love. And the more we pour ourselves into Him and allow Him to pour Himself into us through our sacrificial love, through the sacrifices and the gift and the openness we have toward one another within marriage, that is what will transform our marriages. So this is the paradox and scandal of Christianity, Jesus Christ on the cross. And this is a paradox and scandal in a way of our Christian marriages, that they're meant to be sacrificial, that we're made perfect in suffering. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. I have so many names flooding in for people who would like prayers for seeking a spouse. I hope you'll join me in prayer. I have Jim with me who's going to pray with me for all those spouses all those people who are searching for a spouse. We have Mary who's praying for her daughter Emily in Ohio to find a spouse. We have Carla who's praying for a spouse. We also have Kat Pellet, we have Ashley, we have Chad, Mary, Nathan, Monica. We'll just pray briefly. Our Lady's Seat of Wisdom, St. Joseph, all you holy angels and saints, intercede for those who are seeking a spouse and help console their hearts and be open to the plan Christ has for them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. I have a confession to make. I was homeschooled for my entire upbringing, education, going into college. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Why I bring that up is because I'm going to talk about what many people are interested in with the educational crisis we've seen over the last couple of years. And that is, maybe you're curious or maybe you're thinking about making a transition into homeschooling. My guest on Friday will help us understand how to make that transition if you're interested. Join us at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio.